We need an activist court that, while respecting the rights of accused persons, does not allow them to use technicalities to escape the righteous hand of the law. Prince Bambeo says, how the state ends up frustrating the former and current OSP to come out and speak in this manner is worrying. We cannot continue to weaken every institution set up to fight corruption. XGH, the OSP shouldn't be a president's appointment. How can the OSP prosecute government appointees while he's part of the appointees? That's the problem we sought to solve. That we don't want an attorney general who sits in cabinet to prosecute their own. We still haven't solved the problem. I didn't know that. Peter Doe says what the SP Kisie Jabing is experiencing in the fight against corruption is not different from what his predecessor Martin Amidu had faced. I still believe this regime has no good intention to fight corruption, otherwise themselves. Tanko Osman, we make the judiciary do whatever they want and get away with it. BK54, by now we should have special anti-corruption courts that speedily runs trials on corruption-related offenses. Why should one corruption trial run for 6 years? We are joking. Business as usual won't work. I stand with the OSP. Alhaj Suleiman says, we better get serious with the fight against corruption or kiss it goodbye and suffer the attendant issues associated with corruption. You don't need to be a rocket scientist to know that there is something wrong with the judiciary. You just have to read their rulings in respect of the OSP. 4 cases are enough to draw the conclusion of quote-unquote a gang up. Since 1992, we have been fighting corruption, yet not a single high profile, except Abuga Pele, sitting government official has ever been jailed. Are we joking? Interesting questions there. I think those criticizing Kisie Jabing are being unfair to him, where they are asking him to seek redress. He has appeals pending. Why are they delaying the adjudication? That one we don't know for a fact about why there is any delay. Sometimes it's the lawyers themselves who are delaying the appeal processes. In court trying to set aside one appeal process. The people put it in 1 year, they have gone to sleep, they've done absolutely nothing. Now, the new CJ says, if you bring the matters there and they realize that you are just not interested, they themselves will just throw it away. Eliasu in Tamale says, for the OSP to succeed, it needs all hands on deck. The OSP is within its right to update the nation on matters of public interest. Watch closely those who chide the OSP and its operations. Such persons are likely to be subject of investigations of have already been investigated for some wrongdoing. The OSP, on the other hand, must take all the criticism in good faith and work to rewrite them. Corruption is the bane of this country. Citizens must join hands to nip the canker in the bud. I'll end my messages here and then bring you on the matter of Torco. We'll deal with that as quickly as we can, and then we'll go to the matter of the lithium that IEA has issued a statement. Former CJ also makes a statement that we still can't seem to want to own our own resources. But 5 months ago, on Torco, on this platform, I interviewed Bright Simmons, Alex Mould. Hear what they had to say.
In simple terms, TOR's problems are primarily twofold. It's very broke and very untrusted for all the reasons that I have discussed. We've spent in the last of years, maybe the last less than a decade, we've generated almost $1 billion in various levies, from the original levy to the component in the ESLA, the energy sector levy that we now dedicate to TOR. We've generated over $1 billion. All those taxes, instead of going to TOR directly to clear the debt, expand the refinery, introduce management reform so the government stops appointing cronies whenever it feels like, having a truly independent board by either passing regulations that literally prevent the president from intervening and prevent ministers from intervening. We refuse to do any of those things, right? So what has happened is that everybody doesn't trust TOR. This Ghana Commercial Bank nearly collapsed because of TOR. The government had to find $100 million and bail Ghana Commercial Bank a decade ago. We have a situation where fundamentally, therefore, TOR is not trusted by anyone. Now, the question that you must ask is, will the Torco deal address those two fundamental issues? The fact that the refinery is broke and perpetually broke, and two, the fact that nobody respects and trusts the refinery. Here is where we have a challenge there. We think that because they went about this the wrong way, using single sourcing, not ensuring transparency, not doing international competitive tendering, the fact that the promoters behind it are not well known in the energy financing and operation space. They may have done other things elsewhere, but they are not very well known in the industry. And typically when you do an SPV, it's the people behind the SPV that matter, because the SPV is a shell company. So every focus is on who is the one promoting that SPV. And none of the people that are really found out are behind it have that level of trust in the industry as major operators. Thirdly, where they say you get the crude from brings up all the issues that I've discussed about shady crude being brought to TOR in the past. They have a company called Pontus Trading. Our initial due diligence suggests that Pontus Trading has big issues in Sri Lanka. Some affiliate of it appears to be evading US sanctions. There's a lot of murkiness about Pontus Trading, which they've not come out to be able to explain properly to anybody who's doing due diligence now. And there's a number of due diligence processes that are ongoing, none of which have been very favorable. The last bit, which is very important, is that the capital sources are not clear. I mean, if you're doing an SPV, your ability to raise money is important. And the way we've looked into things, the government has proposed a company called Legacy Capital as potential source of money. When we do our limited due diligence, it turns out that this company has been accused of having, or that he's the founder of this company, has been accused of having links with the Russian mafia. Too much murkiness. Secondly, they keep changing the name of the entity. So they started off saying it was Decimal Capital. Right. Then the person who was promoting Decimal Capital got into trouble with the American government for apparently, at least according to the American government, bribing Ghanaian government officials. Therefore, they changed the name of the entity and then they transferred the capital to, the shareholding to another director and created a new entity that they were then calling Baybridge. Then they created another entity called Torco. It's just a messy shift in terms of identity and things like that. So what are we saying? What they're saying is that private sector participation is essential. Where TOR is now, with Central Refinery about to come on board with 120,000 barrels, it would be, a miracle if TOR survives. But if it's to survive, it's going to require private sector participation. We don't dispute that. So on that leg of the strategy, we agree with the government and with the TOR board and management. Also, we don't run the TOR board and management, right? We don't run TOR. If the board and management says this is their best they're going to get, we have to give them some benefit of the doubt. But here are our issues. One, you need more trustworthy consortium partners, people that are known. They've mentioned Vitol. When we've checked, Vitol have said we don't have a contract with them. We've not decided on anything yet. We are just waiting to see. That is very reassuring. The source of working capital has to be better identified, so we don't have situations where people use, sanction money and things like that to come in, because that will worsen TOR's reputation.
I'm going to make a statement. It's that most badly managed or politically controlled SOEs that have weak management, CEOs and boards, are drawn into certain transactions that extract value for certain individuals who have huge influence in governments at the highest level. This is state capture. We saw it in PDS. We've seen it in different transactions making, and this is the latest. We saw it in gold for oil as well, and we are seeing it in this Torco transaction. Now, anybody who has done refinery economics before knows that the value of your products that you produce from the crude oil has to be far higher than the cost of the crude oil, and your operating costs, your consumption and losses in the refinery. Otherwise, you're going to make losses. Now, Tamale Refinery has been making losses for one reason and one reason only. Its consumption and losses, which should be less than 5%, far exceed 12 to 14%. No refinery on this earth with consumption and losses, that means the fuel you use to heat up the refinery and work, and the losses that are permitted, can go above 6% or 7% in modern times. because it's a very competitive market. The crude oil, the petroleum product sale market is a very competitive market, and you don't make large margins. So you have to be efficient. The reason why Tamale Refinery has been making losses, and many people don't know this, Tamale Refinery was a tolling refinery up to 1996. Tamale Refinery never made a loss till 1996, when it started buying its own crude oil, stopped the tolling agreement with GMPC, who was the only BDC then, and they started producing on their own. From that day, they started making losses because they did not have the capacity to do that. Now, if you look at the transaction itself, we know that due diligence has not been done on this transaction. The transaction is murky, so sourcing is not been open. And one of the things that you do in a transaction, you have to have the strength of the off-taker. They have to have the credit worthiness to be able to pay when you produce the product. You also have to have the financial backing to be able to buy the crude oil. You also have to have an understanding of the Tamale Refinery operations and its losses. Now, the biggest issue in Tamale Refinery right now is the operations. Tamale Refinery will start and shut down within a few days. It takes 48 hours and fuel. That costs a lot of money to start up the refinery again. But it will get faulty in a few days because a process audit was done in 2016 by engineers who came up and told us exactly what needed to be done in Tamale Refinery so that our processes and our instrumentation and our tank farm and all the piping and our gantry would operate in a continuous basis. We have not spent that money. It's going to take us $300 to $500 million to get Tamale Oil Refinery in a position where it will make the refinery make profits. Now, looking at this deal, I just saw $22 million they wanted to spend. In this refinery, where did they get that number from? That's why I say the due diligence has not been done. This transaction is just an extraction transaction to extract some value, bring in crude oil at high prices, and make losses at Tamale Refinery without Tamale Refinery getting better. We want a partner that is going to make Tamale Oil Refinery better. That is going to make our refinery be able to work continuously. Refineries work continuously for 18 months before they shut down. Yes, there will be some hiccups here and there. But if a refinery doesn't work continuously, it's going to make losses.
Right. The Attorney General issued a report on the 15th of November, 2023, and is addressed to Mr. Fuseni Idrisu, the General Secretary, General Transport, Petroleum and Chemical Workers Union of TUC Ghana, and is titled Request for a Reassessment of Torco's Credibility as a Lessee of TOR's Asset. The Attorney General comes to this conclusion and opinion that based on the due diligence report submitted to their office, which they requested of them, our enquiries and the above observations, our office is not in a position to vouch for the credibility of Torco as a lessee in the proposed lease transaction with TOR for the following reasons. One, from the due diligence report, Torco has no financial and technical capacity to undertake the proposed transaction. Two, Torco has no established affiliation with Vitol. It has suggested that earlier. It was found out that was not really correct. Or with any other company which has the needed funds and technical capacity to undertake the proposed lease transaction, and without whose support Torco lacks the financial and technical capacity to undertake its obligations under the proposed lease transaction. And finally, Torco lacks the requisite licenses and documentation. It listed about 6 that it needed or so that Torco doesn't have to undertake the proposed lease transaction. Proceeding with the project will therefore be contrary to the law. We'll be right back. Don't go anywhere. You're welcome back, and we're going to deal with Torco very briefly, and then we move on to the lithium because we want to own our own resources, as Justice Sophia Akufu urges, and the IEA's statement also urges the country to be able to do, instead of continuing with colonial type of contracts over our mineral natural resources. Quickly, the show is brought to you by the kind sponsorship of Bank of Africa, strong as a group and close as a partner, MTN, everywhere you go. HSC University, educating ethical and entrepreneurial leaders for Africa. Robert & Sons Optical Services, your comprehensive eye care service provider for 31 years. Plus, they are producers of quality PVC and HDPE pipes and water tank. Where Plus goes, water flows. DBS Industries, roofing, Papa Fie. My Way Insurance, dial star 165 hash, star 165 hash on MTN to join My Way today. Syntex tanks, it's strong, it's tough. Flamingo paints, simply superior. Snit Seed, that's the self-employed enrollment drive. It's your future, so you own it. Hubtel, it's everything you. And Doormasters, thank you all very much for helping us pay our bills. Now, briefly, before I go to Bright for one or two questions. Start with you, Honorable Nusufseni.
Yes.
This Torco deal.
Yes. Indeed, first of all, let me make some preliminary remarks.
Right.
Tema Oil Refinery is a critical national asset. Discovered that when I was doing my LLM at Legon and was looking at the downstream sector. Clearly, even before Ghana discovered oil, Tema Refinery was already in existence and making huge profits. You remember Ajib? Ajib was a oil trading company in this country. They used to bring in crude and refine at Tema Oil Refinery. That's why Alex Moore describes it as a tolling institution. You just run your crude through and you pay commission. And they were making profits. But immediately we decided that we're going, when GAIP, because the company was established by a partnership between us and Italy, an Italian company. And then when they finally left and we owned it wholesale, we started running losses. Huge losses. Now, does it suggest that we are incapable of managing our own national assets? Or we are so greedy that we prioritize self-interest over national interest? Then come the year 2000, when Kufuor had said that, look, the price of a gallon of petrol was more expensive than water, and so we needed to do something, and that we had to review the TOR debt. I mean, we had to review the petroleum price build-up in order to deal with the TOR debt. Then we introduced the TOR recovery levy. You know,
that's what Bright was saying.
Have you ever?
Bright was saying
yes.
that since then we had accrued over $1 billion, but we didn't really invest it into.
No, but what are we? Who has even given us? But who has even given us an account of the amount of money that the TOR recovery levy has been able to raise? It's just Bright who's saying that we've been able to collect about 1 billion. But something really, who has ever told us in this country the amount of money that the TOR recovery levy has generated? The people of Ghana agreed with government that we needed to recover TOR. We needed to build back TOR. Then impose a levy on ourselves for the purpose of doing that. We didn't say government go borrow money. We said all of us.
Government had earlier gone to South Korea.
Yes.
200 million twice or so.
To invest, and it didn't work. So where is the money? Where's the TOR recovery levy? What has government done with the money?
So now the AG after.
Yes. So it probably is the interest of those who manage TOR to keep it perpetually undercapitalized. And when I say capitalized, both in CAPEX and also in operating cost, so that they can enter into deals like Torrentco, and now also called Tema Energy and Processing Limited. Now, because you simply can understand. Now, two components, and Alex Mose has added many, but two components stand out. The CDU and the RCC, the catalytic unit, and the crude distillation unit. That was the challenge confronting us. Now, the equipment there are old equipment. We need to change them to new equipment. Processing in the downstream is competitive. So your consumption and operational losses must be kept within a certain percentage. Where your equipment is not operating well, you're not going to be within that. And so you're going to continue to record losses. Now that is why thermal oil refinery has been a huge loss-making institution. And there's a huge loss overhang. Now if you need about $300 million to bring back TOR into full operation with all the efficiencies, what will 22 million do?
Well, others have said not 300, but between the 500 and or 1 billion United States
dollars. So okay, so even if you escalate it there, then 22 million becomes a paltry. Now, but this issue of
the 22 million, that is only a lease that they are seeking. They are seeking a lease. They were seeking a PPA approval for that lease, so they will take over the production assets.
Well, so that is the 22 million
assets, and they were going to run it for 6 years.
Well, so
and then
give it back.
Investing $22 million.
Yes,
and then they will be paying a rent every year of about $13 million.
So the 22 million actually is capex. So what was they going to use the 22 million for? To replace the pipes, the gantry, the tanks, or what? You need to understand.
The assessment shows
more
in excess of 300
So you
million.
can see that this was captured. They just wanted to run it. Get the 22 million, distribute the money, get rent, get people okay. Because even when the timber workers said that they thought that the
22 million, the Attorney General says what they find is that they have just, it says, the major concern with respect to the lessee's capacity is that it is a newly incorporated company with a stated capital
of 500,000.
Capital of 500,000 without any documentation, Ghana cedis, without any documentation to show that it has capacity to undertake the proposed transaction.
Shit.
And the Attorney General also find that it was actually incorporated on 1st of January, which was, it says, the date of incorporation may be inactive, may be indicative of an irregularity. Since the 1st of January 2023 was a public holiday, and the Registrar General does not fall within the class of entities which provide essential services.
Yeah, so clearly. So the stated capital of the company is not even $1 million. The stated capital is not $1 million.
Okay.
How can such a company raise money up to $22 million?
They have suggested a certain connection with Vitol, and that also has been found not to be any good thing.
What I'm saying is that the company itself, connection with Vitol is like a mistletoe. They are going to ride on the shoulders of Vitol. And I'm saying that the company itself must be financially capable. You have a company whose stated capital is not even up to $1 million.
Okay.
Wanting to enter into an agreement for 6 years, invest in the $2 million, pay rent of $30 million, and pay service charge of $1.5 per barrel of crude oil process. And that's what makes it ludicrous. Even with TOR operating at $2.5 per barrel, for service charge, they are running at a loss.
Okay.
Then they agree that they will accept from Torco $1.5 per barrel of oil produced. I mean, you see clearly. And I'll just conclude by saying that, look, I think that we need to look critically at what is happening to us as a country. Many people have mentioned PDS, including you. Look at how PDS was established. Up to now, we are not able to retrieve the monies that were collected by PDS on behalf of the Electricity Company of Ghana between the period that they took over the running of the utility service until the time that they were dissolved. No one has recovered that money. Remember the miscellaneous car power transaction? The same company was incorporated in very few days' time, and we're going to take over a very important critical installation in this country, and we're going to pay a whooping amount of money for nothing. You remember Movenpina?
Exactly.
Movenpina was for 1 month.
Talking about TOR, and then you remember
Movenpina. 1 month to the day that 1 million barrels of oil was sold, contaminated oil was sold to them. 1 month. Movenpina. There are many. I mean, if we talk about Ajapa, and clearly there's a problem. And everything is pointing, Prof invites us to look at trend analysis. The trend actually is pointing towards more sinister things, that is state capture. I mean, there's a conscious attempt, deliberate attempt by some people highly placed to capture the commanding heights of this economy.
Well, thankfully, civil society raised these red flags. At the time when they raised the red flags, they were being called all sorts of names. Now, starting with the OSP stopping the transaction so that it will complete its investigation, the Attorney General also gets in from another angle and issues a report. That is a relief, isn't it, Prof?
The fact that the Attorney General's report is in some ways damning is one that invites us to also ask the larger question, where is the board? Where is the board of TOR? What is their responsibility in all these? Boards in transactions like this, in my opinion, are supposed to perform at least 3 things. The first one is that boards are supposed to ensure that the cost-benefit analysis balances on the side of benefits to the company for which they are the board. Did the board of TOR do this cost-benefit analysis in the context of all the facts you mentioned, which does not need further repetition? Number 2, the board is supposed to ensure that in joint venture transactions like these, whether by way of a strategic investor, whether it's even a merger and acquisition or a merger or acquisition, whatever transaction it is of this character, the board is supposed to ensure that they have a clear understanding of the strategic benefits of the relationship. To what extent did the board do that strategic analysis to ensure that it has a clear or certain clarity of understanding of the partner or the other entrepreneur who is coming into this particular transaction? Again, the Attorney General's department, the Attorney General's office's work by way of due diligence is damning. When you have a whole board which is supposed to have been looking into these, and the final one is that the board is supposed to ensure the warding of short to medium term and long term risks to the company. Now, there are dangers of risks, all kinds of risks, and all kinds of risks of exposures. I think some have been mentioned. You have a company whose capital injection requirement is supposed to be anywhere on the threshold of $500 million to $1 billion. That's the estimation, $500 million to $1 billion, whether it's by way of capex or by way of operational capital. And then you have a potential investor whose capital, by way of a bank record, is 500,000 cedis. If you're speaking in dollar terms, that's less than $100,000. That's probably less than about $50,000. So from $1 billion or $500 million, then you have about $50,000 thereabouts capital injection, capital to show by way of the company involved. It is, and I'm not suggesting that that is the reality by way of any stretch of imagination, but it is not to be forgotten the fact that there are speculative investors out there who actually enter into transactions so that they can now have the gravitas and the brand to go to the capital market to raise money. The investors who do that.
It was said of PDS that they had nothing. They just came in, took our property assets, and then started to,
I try to avoid them. I don't know. I try to avoid details on some of these things.
And remember the history of Torco, and the Attorney General recaps what we had been spoken about over the period. It says that Torco had changed twice. Had changed twice during the due diligence process. Initially, it was Decimal Company Limited. Then Bay Bridge Asset Management Limited, and now Torco Asset Management Limited. The report is limited to Torco. However, the history has been taken into consideration for the sake of completeness. And Imani Asep traced the former head of TOR, who had issues with the US government and was put on arrest in the UK as the one who was fronting this company, and then he had to be changing from one identity to the next.
The reality of companies, and there are a lot of them, especially companies, they're not from Ghana necessarily. Some of them are actually from the West, and they understand that Africa is a fertile ground. I'll give you an example. Nigeria recently won a multi-billion-dollar arbitration against a company, PNID.
Right.
Now, the arbitration found, and indeed the UK court found as a fact, that the company had involved itself in corrupt deals, corrupting public officials in order to be able to get the transaction that they got, and therefore justifying Nigeria's breach or refusal to follow through with the contract. And the court, as a result, decided not to punish Nigeria for breaching the contract because it found that the contract was tainted with corruption. What I'm saying is, you have foreign entities out there who understand that the game is played a certain way in Africa. And they do come to Africa, and they do see the ones they have to see, and eventually they are able to get deals that ordinarily, on the face of it, appear problematic to accept. And so the point I'm making is, if you have a company that has 500,000 cedis in account, talking about close to $1 billion capital injection transaction, on the face of it, it is not a deal that we should even be talking about. And we have the Attorney General of Ghana, who is saying that my due diligence report on this company is one for which I can't vouch. In fact, the Attorney General appears to even be charitable, because he says he can't vouch. He didn't say they are bad. He just said, I can't, which essentially is saying that, look, I probably may not have the full facts, but from what I've seen, it's not something I can endorse.
Right.
But the long and short, and I'll take the Attorney General's statement of I can't vouch to mean just don't. So I think there's a lot more for us to look at in this particular transaction. And I'll just probably finally make this comment because I know you're out of time, but just make the point on TOR. That TOR appears to have in this animal that government to government in Ghana, for some reason, we just don't seem to have the answer to TOR. Perhaps it is about time, beyond the recovery, for Ghana to have a proper stepping back conversation on TOR, which may involve perhaps a comprehensive commission of inquiry. We need to probably understand whether TOR as a national asset, one, whether it is strategic, and two, if it is strategic, whether Ghana as a country should continue involving itself in TOR, or whether we should diversify ourselves of TOR. And if we are diversifying ourselves of TOR, how do we overcome the perennial deficit of selling, or rather underselling, state assets? So I think that we've gotten to that point where perhaps we should have that conversation. Because one thing, Honorable, you mentioned a lot, but one thing you probably also mention is the allegations that people have made about how vested interests have deliberately kept TOR where it is.
Yes.
So that you can have the privates, oil important, the BDCs. You can have the BDC industry also in business. Because it is because you have TOR the way it is. That's why somebody's business is also doing well. But we need to have these things holistically looked at. I think the piecemeal approach is not helping.
Thank you very much. And remember that it was the Germans that set up this and operated 1963. And then we went to nationalize it 1977 thereabout. And suddenly we can't seem to manage our own affairs, or deliberately mismanaging
our own affairs.
The Attorney General says TOR is a prominent national asset. And therefore it is important that the capacity and status of companies with which it carries out proposed investments are fully established. It listed 8 different permits, authorizations and permits that this company set up on a holiday, how many months before it went into the transaction, fronted by somebody who was heading that entity, who is in trouble over similar questions, and the US gets him arrested in the UK, comes to take such an important national asset. Bright Simmons, I suppose at this point, even before the OSP that started this and issued a stop order on this matter, at this point, you, the CSOs, are sitting back and saying, we thank God. At long last, we have been heard and we were right, correct?
So that the Attorney General's intervention was because the unions wrote to the Attorney General. It's not because, the government system as it currently is somehow found a way to involve the Attorney General. You would assume that for a transaction of this size, perhaps advice of the Attorney General would have been, sensible for the board itself to request, especially once it became a controversial issue. The second thing that I think is also very important to note, and I think some of your guests have hinted at it, is that the Temahoe Refinery situation is one marked by considerable self-dealing and insider dealing. So this attempt to now change Torco into Tema Energy and Processing Limited was done in connivance with board members. So board members actually went to the extent of working with some of the workers who they perceived to be in opposition to create a trust and then give shares to those trusts controlled by a few of the employees. I mean, where does this happen in the public sector? So let me explain this very carefully so you understand. This company started because the former CEO of TOR, once he left the company, created a shell company to come and take over Shell. Bear that in mind. That's how it started. That's decimal. Then he realized that he could not do it without involving other people. So other people then came on board. And then over time, it was recognized that because he had been arrested or indicted on corruption grounds, his involvement was beginning to prevent them from accessing funds and other benefits. So he was then more or less removed, and another person then took over. When that person took over and created Bay Bridge, they then found out there were still challenges with reputational issues. So they now changed to Torco. And then when they found opposition from the workers, they did two things. They brought on board some of the workers as shareholders now of the SPV. And then secondly, one of the suppliers that had been indicated as one of the group of entities that were going to help them acquire capacity was brought on board as CAD as an investor. So this is clearly what we call in local parlance referekobo. You know what I mean? So these are people that are basically walking around trying to do a deal. I understand their arguments up to a point. The argument being that they did not present themselves as having the capacity. Rather, they presented themselves as having the creativity to come up with a solution that will get TOR going. Because at this stage, TOR is so badly managed that they were the least evil, they were the least of all the evils that were potentially possible, given that nobody will give TOR money, etc. But the problem is that their involvement prolongs the agony. It keeps giving all that we now learned. TOR's reputation is in tatters. So we go back to the insider dealing matter. When you look at TOR's board, I told you that TOR's former CEO left the company, tried to take it over. On top of that, certain board members then worked with a so-called incoming investor to create a charity trust that is supposed to be on behalf of the workers. But I should also tell you that one of the current board members at TOR is a very strong business partner of the previous CEO of TOR. And then the other top board members that are there, the majority of them are either politicians and strong members of the ruling party, or good friends of politicians or business partners of politicians. You can't have corporate governance when everything is designed to facilitate insider dealing and self-dealing. So that is the fundamental problem of TOR. The second issue that we have to then recognize is that where we are now, TOR's reputation is in tatters. There is a private company, a Chinese funded company that is coming in with 3 times TOR capacity. And they are now demanding massive concessions from the government, including $261 million in tax reliefs. And on top of that, asking the government to sell them crude oil in local currency on very favorable terms to produce. So everybody has become used to an environment in which office bearers do what they want, are constantly self-dealing, are constantly involved in making money or trying to make money through the beneficence of the public purse. And we have somehow sleepwalked into a situation where nobody is accountable, nobody resigns, nobody takes anything at all as a matter of the gravest integrity at all. So that's where we are with TOR.
I see. And as we understand, and Bright, this is supposed to be the latest in the series of opinions that the Attorney General has issued on this matter. The Attorney General has issued at least 3 different opinions. Now, does it look to you that but for such interventions, PPA set up with the capacity to scrutinize all of this would have escaped once again?
It's worse than you think. It's worse than you think because when the matter was sent to PPA, which is the Public Procurement Authority, PPA found itself incapable of making definite comments. All these things around the due diligence process, don't forget the private law firm was hired to do extensive due diligence and issued preliminary reports, which already was damning because there was evidence that there was no capacity, there was evidence of poor compliance. Now, it's not just capacity, there was also evidence that this entity treats compliance with disdain. Annual reports they're supposed to file, they don't care and things like that. All of that was available. PPA, which we think as at this stage is not fit for purpose because it's been captured by politicians, right? So PPA was not bold enough to say, look, given everything that we see, this is not making sense. What they did was then refer the matter to the Ministry of Finance, claiming that because it looks like a public-private partnership, to their mind, the Ministry of Finance was the appropriate authority. Now remember that the board of TOR now claims in their own explanations that they involve the Ministry of Energy, they involve the Ministry of Finance, and they involve the State's Interest and Governance Authority, SIGA. That's what the board of TOR says. Did they indeed involve these organizations? What did these organizations say? Given that these facts that the Attorney General has made apparent is known to everybody. What did these important government institutions say? What are their heads saying? What is the Ministry of Energy saying? Why have none of them bothered to issue a statement saying, yes, this was what was brought before us, and this was what we advised, etc., etc. If this is not state capture of the worst sort, how come none of these organizations or major government authorities, Ministry of Energy, Ministry of Finance, SIGA, why are they quiet? How come none of them have said anything substantive or substantial about these proceedings? So that tells you that this goes beyond simply a matter of whether or not somebody has oversight, or had oversight of some of the key issues at the PPA level. This is really a matter of grave damage to the integrity of the systems that are supposed to make sure that the public interest is protected.
My final question to you will be, do you think that, or you have expectations that these sort of investigations and due diligence by state organizations will not just end here by saying you have been stopped, but potentially some people will have to face some consequences?
So from everything that we've seen, it's obviously not, because the board is not even recognizing that the statements that they've made give clear evidence of a board that is completely bereft of its capacity to assert its fiduciary duties. It's clear. But the board doesn't even seem to acknowledge it. They said that, the DDR, the due diligence process was ongoing, and that at some point these were constitution precedent. But we have evidence that shows that TEPL had already gone to TOR and has started issuing instructions around the place. They had already hired people to start taking control of the assets and things like that. So on what basis is an incomplete due diligence process the foundation for allowing a private operator to enter a state institution like TOR and start to issue instructions to workers and start to take control of access, etc., etc.? Okay. The board has absolutely no self-awareness of the degree to which they failed in discharging their fiduciary responsibilities, and that's the problem.
All right.
This lack of self-awareness of the Ghanaian elite in acknowledging the degree to which they often fail in discharging their obligations to the people of this country is why this country is sinking.
All right.
So we have no expectations whatsoever that anybody on the board will wake up and say, or stand up and say, look, we really did mess up. Absolutely not. Thank
you very much, Bright Simmons, Honorary Vice President, Imani Africa. In the studio, Professor Kofi Abochi and Inusa Fuseni, lawyer, former MP, Tamale Central. We will take our final break, and when we return, we will look at the question of the lithium that we now want to get into. Another gold for Ghana, right? But there are people who are concerned that the contracts we are seeking to enter, they look the same way like colonial days, and we must do something better and take control of our natural resources. Because of the limitedness of the time, we will try and do some preliminary about it, and then hopefully take care of it next week. We'll be joined also by the CEO of the Minerals Commission, who is an expert in this area, to gauge his views on how matters are, going on in this matter. We'll be right back.